Hey everyone, this lecture is about traditional old school folk horror and more importantly the history of Halloween, something that we're all sort of familiar with. But before we get into that, I want to just wish you all a wonderful, happy New Year. Because that's what Halloween used to be. Halloween was at one point the ancient Celtic New Year. Now, the Celts were the indigenous people of ancient Ireland and the British Isles and a part of France and Spain. And they celebrated a holiday called Samhain. No, that is not pronounced Samhain. The Celtic languages did not have a written system until long after they were wiped out. So a lot of their words and language were transliterated in Latin and English, and the letters were not really a one-to-one. So that word is pronounced Samhain, not Samhain. And Samhain, oh, sorry, and Samhain was an ancient Neolithic festival, and it marked the last day of the harvest. That's the reason it was considered to be the New Year for the Celts. When you have an entire agricultural-based society and your entire life is built around farming and harvesting and all that sort of life, the last day of the harvest is probably going to be the last day of the year for you. And it marked what the Celts called beginning of the dark half of the year, where the sun god or Lu or the Holly King or whatever different iteration or face they put on it, it changes from tradition to tradition, died, and the year went into a darker, drearier half. And on this day in particular, it's when the boundary between the other world and our world, the world of the living, was at its thinnest. And then the Aoshi, what we know as fairies today, could cross over. And to prevent them from harassing people or following you home and cursing you or kidnapping your children, you would give offerings to these Aoshi, these fairies, in order to keep them happy. Celtic mythology is not really talked about often today. It takes a much major backseat to Greek and Roman and even Norse mythology these days. And unfortunately, another reason for that is because, again, it wasn't written down. It was all oral tradition. And a lot of it was not written down until Christian monks came in and converted everyone and took many of their myths and Christianized a lot of aspects. Some spirits and fairies became angels. Some of the gods became saints in Catholicism. One of the main figures, Cuchulainn, sort of the Christ-like figure and a Hercules-like figure in Celtic mythology, fought one of his most important, and I think his last battle before he died to save humanity, happened on Samhain. And early archaeological records suggest that Samhain might have been an actual week-long festival. But what we do know is that it's always a festival for the dead. That the dead of the past were honored and revered. And some tales suggest that there might have been human sacrifices, but a lot of that ends up being what we believe now, especially, to be Christian propaganda to make the ancient Celts look evil and bad. But some suggest that evil people made sacrifices to a group of people called the Fomorians, and we'll talk about them in a second. This is called an Onagat, or the Cave of Cats. These are like one of the many gates of the underworld that are pockmarked throughout Ireland and the British Isles. And they said that spirits could come out of these caves. Spirits and fairies would travel from the other world to this world via these caves. And this one in particular is where a major Celtic goddess, the Morrigan, would come out of and arise every Samhain. The Morrigan was sort of like the Phantom Queen. She's similar to Valkyries in Norse mythology. She's also similar to the Fates in Greek mythology. Sometimes she's portrayed as one person. Sometimes she's portrayed as a trio of people. But she's always seen as an harbinger of death and doom. Now, it's not typically clear that she's the one that causes it, because she is a psychopomp. A psychopomp is a religious figure or a spiritual figure in any sort of religion or mythology that takes a dead person's spirit to the afterlife. That's all psychopomp means. And she would always appear whenever a major amount of death was about to happen. Like if a massive battle where a lot of people were going to die and therefore a lot of people needed to go to the afterlife, like, all right, let me come out. And she would go there and clean up. So if she ever appeared on Earth, that meant like somewhere a lot of death was about to happen. And the Fomorians in ancient Irish mythology are a hostile race of giant supernatural creatures. They are sort of the opposite and equal to the gods of Celtic mythology, because whereas the gods and the fairies represent the nurturing and the good and healthy parts of nature, the Fomorians represented chaos and the harsh, lethal aspects of nature. Whereas fire could give heat and warmth and cook food, it can also destroy forests and kill people. Water is necessary for life. We need to drink it to live, but it could also drown us or make us sick. And the Fomorians inhabited Ireland after the Great Flood. Yes, that is the same flood of Noah and the Ark in the Bible. Over 500 different religions and cultures have a similar story to Noah and the Ark, and many of them predate the Old Testament by thousands of years. And the Fomorians, basically, they escaped the flood by moving to Ireland, and then the first settlers of Ireland came and were enslaved by them, and then the Tuatha De Danann, or the tribe of gods, as it is from means in Celtic language, were their saviors. The Tuatha De Danann were the gods that dwelled in the other world, and many of these figures were changed into saints or angels by Christian monks, and they are the ones that liberated the Irish people from the evil, dark Fomorians. The Aoshi, fairies as we call them, are not the cute little cuddly things that we associate with fairies today, like Tinkerbell and whatnot. Instead, fairies are beings of absolute chaos. They are immortal creatures that don't understand humans and how fragile we can be and how cursed we are to be mortal and to die. They live in an invisible parallel universe, only really known as the Otherworld. Sometimes they're ancestors or spirits of the departed. Sometimes they are the physical spirits of nature. Sometimes they're just the servants of the gods. It depends on who you ask and what tribe you were talking to and what era you were researching them in. But we all know that they are always going to be chaotic beings. And there are two categories: Seelie, which means happy, and Unseelie, which means unhappy. But regardless of what type of fairy you were dealing with, there was always one major thing. They loved sweet food. They loved candy. They loved sugar. And if you gave a fairy candy, it would leave you alone. A lot of the traditional observations that we see today also come from ancient Celtic mythology and practice. Jack-o'-lanterns were first originally made from turnips. This creepy little figure is one of the oldest known from 850 or so first preserved ever jack-o'-lantern, and it's made out of a turnip. Pumpkins were only indigenous to North America, so for the centuries before white settlers moved to the New World, their first jack-o'-lanterns were made with carved turnips filled with candles. And the story behind the jack-o'-lantern was that a man called Jack, of course, was so wicked and so evil and so practiced in dark black magic that heaven would refuse to ever accept him in, that no redemption could ever bring him to heaven. And he was so wicked and so evil that the devil himself wanted to come collect his soul when he died. So Jack, being the practitioner of a dark magic that he was, found a way to make a devil trap. He made a lantern with an evil face that, when lit, the light would always keep all evil spirits and demons at bay, including the devil. So Jack, heaven doesn't want him, and the devil can't touch him, is wandering around the earth forever, living as an immortal being because of this lantern. At least that was the traditional story about it. But yeah, a jack-o'-lantern is just a gourd that you carve, put a candle in, and the light will protect you from even the devil himself. Another main staple for the Celts were great massive bonfires that were built around Samhain. Major hilltops were dotted with massive bonfires where it had people drinking and partying and dancing all around them all the night. And there were several possible spiritual meanings, whether it was to keep the light going for the rest of the year because the year was going into the dark half, or to dance as close to the fire and jump over the bonfires and let the flames cleanse you and free you of your past troubles and your sin. And bonfires are still a major part of Halloween to this day, depending on how much you want to party with it. Costumes, trick-or-treating, guising, and mummery, as it used to be called, were also a major staple of the original Halloween celebrations. People in Celtic villages would go door to door and accept offerings on behalf of the Aoshi. Basically, what would happen is you would send your children out dressed in elaborate costumes to pretend to be the fairies, and you would have to offer these fairies treats. And if you didn't, you would be cursed by the fairies to be tricked for the rest of the year. Hence, trick or treat. But it really built a community sort of building exercise where everyone made sure that no one in the village would starve, because your children would go around and you would trade food with everyone, so everyone in the village had a nice, diverse diet to get them through the winter. And the costumes originally started out as pretending to be the fairies to make it fun, and then it sort of grew into, when it became more Christianized, protecting your face to not be seen as being bad or desperate for having to beg door to door for food. There's a similar tradition in Wales called the Merry Lwyd. It's more around Christmas time, but it's the skull of a white horse that would literally have a rap battle at your door, and if you could out-rhyme scheme and out-poetry this skeleton puppet, it would have to leave you alone. But if you lost the rap battle, it got to go into your house and take whatever it wants out of your pantry and drink all of your beer. And it's still kind of a minor practice in most Welsh villages to this day. It's still a little fun British thing. And masks have always been part of religious cultures and pagan practices as far back as millennia in ancient Africa, where elaborately carved gourds and lanterns and masks date back tens of thousands of years, and we see evidence of them being used as far back as 800 BCE in Ireland and Wales. And even the first mention of the name Samhain happens in the 1st century AD, or CE, Common Era, since we've been more inclusive with that. So the reason why you would do this is just to sort of spare yourself the indignity of having to beg for food. Rare trick-or-treating also still comes out of a community building and sharing exercise where giving food blessed your house and gave you good luck. This came out of the old Christian practice of giving soul cakes around the 1400s, where the poor of your village would go around and sing songs and give prayers door to door, kind of like Christmas carolers. And as thanks for their prayers and their blessings and their music, you would invite them into your house, and you would share these soul cakes that you had specifically baked for this day for them on All Souls Day. Apples were also still a major part. The bobbing for apple thing that goes back to around at least 300 BCE. Bobbing for apples was a major Halloween party staple. Usually it was for women. If you were able to successfully catch an apple in your mouth, you're supposed to take that apple home and not eat it. You were supposed to go home and put it under your pillow at night, and that night you would dream of who your future husband would be. And apples would have a huge major pagan connection. If you cut an apple in half horizontally, there is a 5-pointed star, which is a major symbol in pretty much every religion across the world. And as a Halloween tradition, you would cut an apple in half, eat one half of it, and then bury the other half in your front yard, and that would protect your house from evil spirits, and also help you gain and attract more love into your life. But eventually everything became sort of Christianized as time went on. And Samhain became All Souls Day and All Hallows Eve. And it used to actually be the biggest tradition and the most important Christian holiday in the medieval period. And it was a 3-day celebration. Halloween comes from All Hallows Eve, which Eve is short for evening or evening before. So All Hallows Evening gets shortened to All Hallows Eve, and then Halloween. And that was just the precursor to All Souls Day and All Saints Day. All Hallows Eve, Halloween, was the day in which you partied the hardest that you could. You went out, you had fun, you danced, you drank, you did whatever you could, because for the next 3 days, you were going to be in quiet, prayerful contemplation. Sort of like Fat Tuesday before Lent and Easter. You get all your sin out the way so you can have these next days to be super pious. And All Souls Day was a day in which you would revere and remember all of the dead. And All Saints Day was a day to revere all of the saints in Christendom, both discovered and undiscovered. Ones that have not been canonized yet but haven't been born but will be a saint in the future. And these celebrations were also a major part of the holy obligations. Church bells were supposed to ring all day and all night. Candles were lit in windows to guide lost souls home, and lavish parties were held to keep the unhappiness and the darkness at bay. That even though the world was getting cold and dark as winter approached, there was still light inside of us. And this all sort of culminates in something called the Dance Macabre, or the Dance of Death. And it's sort of the reason why Halloween used to be the biggest Christian celebration at first, and then became Christmas sort of nowadays. That's because of the focus of religion shifted. Throughout the medieval period, and all the way through the 1700s and the Age of Enlightenment, death was everywhere. Death was commonplace. If you were a woman, you had a 1 in 3 chance of dying every time you gave birth. And you had to have a lot of children because infant mortality rates were so high. So religion had to focus on death and the afterlife. Like, hey, we know this life is hell. We know you lost your children. We know that life is harsh. But if you are a good person and you believe and worship God, you will go to heaven and you will have paradise, and this life will have been worth it. But now, life is good. Life has a lot more quality enhancements, and healthcare is improved, and people are living longer lives. So instead of focusing on death now, religion focuses on being alive and doing what you can here. So Christianity's most important celebration shifted from being one of death, Halloween, to being one of life, the birth of their Savior. Now I want to talk about some... Hold on one second. Sorry, my camera has frozen, so we'll just do this with voice. So right now I also want to talk about some of the more common figures and monsters that we see around Halloween and in traditional horror. First, we start with Dracula himself. Dracula was just his nickname. His real name was Vlad Tepes III. He was the Prince of Wallachia, a province in modern-day Romania. He actually is a real figure, and in Eastern Orthodox Christianity, he is the hero of Romania. Romania used to be at constant war with the Ottoman Empire, and as prince and leader of the army, Dracula actually thwarted the Muslim conquest of the Ottoman Empire from invading into Eastern Europe and reaching Germany and even the Holy Roman Empire at the time. Dracula actually means son of the dragon, or son of Dracul. The reason he is named this is because his father, also named Vlad, started a order of knights called Ordo Dracul, or Order of the Dragon, and it was an order of knights whose sole mission was to protect Europe and protect Christianity from the invading Ottoman Empire. And it was very, very successful. And as his son, Dracula became known as, son of the dragon, and hence his little nickname. And he was known for being a very brutal and ruthless tactician on the battlefield. Many of the stories that persist around his cruelty and his savagery might be embellished and might be propaganda, because even though he is a hero in Eastern Orthodox Christianity, he is seen as a villain in Western Catholic Christianity. There was a huge schism and falling out between the two Orthodox Christian churches, and one saw each other as, the villain. Where the dragon is a symbol of God in Eastern Christianity, the dragon is a symbol of the devil in Western Catholicism. He was also sort of nicknamed Vlad the Impaler because he had a reputation for taking the people he captured in battle and slowly impaling their bodies on large wooden spikes to let them slowly waste away and die in front of everyone, including sometimes he would have large dinner banquets outside, and the dinner would be surrounded by these prisoners impaled on stakes. And he was actually just sort of chosen randomly by Bram Stoker. Bram Stoker didn't actually care about the history or background story of Vlad Tepes. That's a modern invention. He just looked through history, saw the name, thought it was cool, and just took it. The original Dracula novel has no romantic subplot or about Elizabetha at all. That, again, is a modern invention made by Francis Ford Coppola. Or was it Martin Scorsese? I can't remember. And also, he, in the novel, was not killed by sunlight, and even for the longest time, sunlight did not actually kill vampires. The first time sunlight ever killed a vampire in a written story is 1922, the film Nosferatu. Because they couldn't get the rights to make a Dracula movie, they had to legally change a lot of the names and plot points, and so they had their new vampire, Count Orlok, destroyed by the sun. And that scene became so prolific that it's ingrained itself into the mythology now, even though it's only 101 years old. And even the novel Dracula was preceded by much larger, but not nearly as famous now novels, such as Carmilla and Varney the Vampire. But Dracula and vampires and a lot of the other creatures that we see also sort of have their roots and their features rooted in anti-Semitism. Werewolves, another major staple. Nearly every single culture and mythology in the world has a myth of humans that are shapeshifters and can turn into animals. Werewolf literally means, from the Anglo-Saxon, man-wolf. And lycanthropy means wolfman in Greek. Lycanthropy comes from the man Laocoon. He was a king who angered and got cursed by Zeus. Laocoon doubted the god's actual power, so he wanted to test Zeus, so he actually killed one of his own children and baked him into a pie and served Zeus this meat pie at a dinner table. And Zeus immediately caught on and said, "I know what you did. I know you're trying to test me. Screw you. You're now a wolf." And it became a major staple. And a lot of Christianity folk tales in Europe have it as an intentional curse or a satanic pact. Like, one of the ways that you could become a werewolf was to sell your soul to Satan and to drink the rainwater out of a wolf's paw print in the mud. Sometimes it was divine punishment, but the modern view is we actually think that the Western and European view of werewolves comes and is based upon Viking berserkers. Berserkers from the Netherlands and the whole Viking world basically were fearsome warriors who wore the skins of animals, usually bears, almost literally berserker. And they would get drunk, they would get rip-roaringly high or roided out. They would take some sort of intoxicant and just lose their mind on the battlefield and just destroy everything in their path. And it looked like they weren't even human. It looked like they were monsters. And that sort of inspired the view of werewolves. There was also a major incident in France called Le Bête de Gévaudan in 1764, where a massive creature that we think to this day might have been a bear with mange or an escaped lion or tiger from an aristocrat's menagerie, went on a killing spree and started killing peasants across the Gévaudan countryside. But the whole thing about silver and killing werewolves and full moons making them turn, or a bite making you into a werewolf, is all a complete modern invention that came from The Wolfman with Lon Chaney, part of the major Universal horror franchises. Witches, or Hextesse or Hexen, are a major staple, but also this has some of our most egregious stereotypes and even anti-Semitism and misogyny, which comes from the Old English word huichean, and there was hysterical persecution of women in power, or women who were different, or women who lived on the outskirts for millennia in Europe. The stereotypical view of the witch with the hooked nose and the warts and the greasy, strangly hair and the hat all comes from the 1720s. They weren't based upon alewives. In fact, unfortunately, the big nose and the eating Christian babies, just like vampires, especially Count Orlok's look, is heavily based upon Jewish stereotypes at the time. And it was just a way of othering people. Unfortunately, that is a lot of our modern horror tropes. They are built in the other with a capital O. Whoever is the misunderstood or unwanted social pariah or a social class that you look down upon, you eventually can tweak them, strip their humanity, and turn them into a monster, both figuratively and in some cases, quite literally. Jews have been othered since ancient Rome, and most of our mantra's features were based upon the Jewish stereotypes. Blood libel being one of them, and even that persists today in things like the QAnon conspiracy theories, the Pizzagate, the satanic cabal that lives in DC, and that there's a secret satanic pedophile ring ran out of this pizza shop in Washington. It's all crazy, and it's all built out of the same othering that has persisted for the last 2,000 years, and unfortunately it's always based upon foreigners and Jews, and it's not right. So when you look at a monster, take a closer look and start thinking, who is this based upon, who is this stereotyping, and what is the racial implications of this monster? Because there probably are some. Zombies, which comes from the African and Haitian Nzambi or Zumbi. The concept of the living dead dates all the way back to the very first story ever written, Gilgamesh. And the word zombie first appears in 1819 in a poem of the Zumbi. But our understanding of zombie, of living dead, walking around, shuffling flesh eaters, that's all in Haitian origin. Haitian zombies were created by a Bokor. A Bokor is basically a voodoo practitioner who uses dark magic for selfish, evil gains. And it's all born out of the West African diaspora, where slaves were kidnapped from Africa and then deposited in the Caribbean, and then once the slavery was over, or once they were disputed, or once they got their freedom, they were sort of left there to their own devices and had to make their own new society and new life in Haiti, in Barbados, and other places around the Caribbean. But Haiti is the one that we focus mostly on with zombies, because that is the main sort of origin of them. But our view of zombies actually comes from a tetrodotoxin known as datura. Datura is a very powerful hallucinogen, and in large quantities it's extremely poisonous and can fry a person's brain, basically lobotomizing them and making them into a mindless, drooling, ego-deathed person. But the first ever story that we have of our modern concept of living dead, of dead being reanimated and killing the living, comes from H.P. Lovecraft's 1905 story, Herbert West Reanimator. And the first movie appeared with the title in 1932, starring Bela Lugosi, the movie White Zombie. But they didn't actually start eating flesh and eating people until Night of the Living Dead. That is also the first time that we see that the only way to kill them is to shoot them in the head or destroy the brain. Before that, you would have to either destroy the body as much as you could with total dismemberment, or you can't kill them and just run. And then Halloween kind of gets modernized, and there's really no evidence of it actually being big in North America until the mid-19th century. Even though Christians had moved to North America since the 1600s, they were Puritans, they were Protestants, and Halloween was very much a Catholic holiday. And the Puritans notoriously hated Catholics and saw anything they did with suspicion. So that's another reason why in America and in mostly Protestant communities, Halloween is seen as a holiday of the devil. Even though it is one of the biggest Christian holidays in history, it's seen as the devil because, one, its spooky nature, and two, its ties to Catholicism because, as the Puritans once said, the only thing worse than a witch is a Catholic. And that's how much their hatred and paranoia over them persisted. But when large Irish Catholic populations started immigrating to America and getting a real foothold in the United States, that's when it started growing, and especially the use of pumpkins for jack-o'-lanterns because they were much easier to carve and were much more aesthetically pleasing. And many Protestants to this day still shun Halloween as a Catholic or pagan devil holiday, and many of you probably in this class either had or know someone who was not allowed to celebrate Halloween because of its evil implications. But even to this day, even though it's not a major holiday or a major celebration for Catholicism, it is still technically a Catholic holiday that some churches still revere. And it's also had some nice worldwide spread, and it's become more secular and more non-religious and just commercialized and, frankly, capitalist. It kind of boomed in Japan in the 2010s. In China, it got adopted because it's very similar to their holiday known as the Hungry Ghost Festival. It was used to be big in Switzerland, but it declined since 1999 because Switzerland is so cosmopolitan and has so many holidays that they have what's called a holiday glut, and they wanted to get rid of some holidays because they had too many parties they had to get rid of. So I know this was a bit of a crash course and not as hands-on as I like to give it during a face-to-face lecture, and I'm sorry that my camera went out, but I hope this was a nice little fun, interesting lesson and that it maybe opened your eyes, but also, made you rethink the holiday and what you think about it. So, hope you have a fun, spooky one, and we'll continue this discussion later.